Well, Kennedy was killed. Everything soured everywhere. Everything was stopped. I mean, the economy was terrible. Wasn't no building, wasn't nothing, you know. And we run around all over Dallas for, I guess, for about 3 weeks trying to find work. And you couldn't buy a job then. I just thought of why we came back to Mississippi that third time. When we was living in that little garage apartment there, we had Gene living with us in Dallas.
Was with us too.
That was when we was living in Dallas in that garage apartment. Gene was living with us.
Yes, because when we came back to Hattiesburg and lived with Mr. Wilson, she was still living.
Yeah, she was still living. Well, she lived with us for 2 or 3 years.
And Nita lived with us over in Dallas until she married her first husband.
But anyway.
So you had Nita and Gene over there.
No, it's different times.
At different times.
But Nita had married in the meantime and left and went to Phoenix, Arizona with her first husband.
But anyway, I remember what brought us back to Mississippi was that I was working in a shoe store over in Dallas, and Bob Banks was a masonry contractor the Dallas Builders Incorporated, that I had worked with in Dallas, so, you know, laid brick. And he called me and he said, "Buddy," said, I got a job in Albuquerque, New Mexico, building a nuclear warfare building. And you can just about work rain or shine, because not only the building, but we got a mile of tunnel that's got to be glazed tile has got to be laid in that tunnel. So I told Bob I quit selling shoes, and I had a little I had a 63 or 64 Chevrolet car at that time, and they were several of the bricklayers that we had worked. He wanted me to go pick them up and take them to Albuquerque. So I had about 4 or 5 of them in my car. I think 3 in the back seat, 2 in the front. And then we drove from Dallas to Albuquerque, New Mexico, and then I worked on that job. And I got kind of down in the dumps out there because Linda had just been born, and I thought, here I am again, running all over the damn country trying to work, and I'm not getting to be with my family. So I stayed over there and worked
3 weeks.
3 or 4 weeks or something like that, and then we was gonna come back to Dallas. And after about 3 weeks, I come back, and when I come back, I said, you know, we've tried everything else. I'm going back to Mississippi, and that's when we stopped in Jackson. And I worked we worked for 5 years around Jackson.
All right. Let me try to figure out some memories here. There was some place that we lived in a house, and Gene was newly married, lived in a trailer. I had to go around that big drainage ditch that was behind us, and it was concrete, but you couldn't go across it because it was fenced on both sides. And I remember having to go around it to get to that trailer park to visit Gene. But we lived next door to some little old boy who was maybe a year or 2 younger than me. He was like 6 and still drank a bottle. And I used to make fun of that kid mercilessly.
Well, now that was when we lived in Chalmette, the little boy that come home and drank a bottle after school. We were living in Chalmette on that.
You'd hide behind the door and take your bottle.
Come home and get behind the door. And then that's when I was seeing the doctor because I was pregnant with Kim.
Yeah. Well, okay, so that was New Orleans.
That was New Orleans.
Okay. All right, so you come back. We lived in Jackson for a little while at the duplexes, and you ultimately made the decision to come back to Hattiesburg.
Right. So I come back to Hattiesburg, and that's when Herman had he had a good bit of work here, and me and Herman went in together in partners and formed a business. We moved back to Hattiesburg, and that's when I got involved in the JCs and some other organizations.
We started out on Adeline Street, 1605 Adeline Street,
Right.
the first house.
That was CBN, and that's when I met all these guys over the radio and everything.
So I went back to Camp School, had Mrs. Turner and Miss Ritchie and some other teachers that I can't remember, but that was first time I can remember going to school for any length of time. So finished part of the 4th in the 5th and the 6th grade there, and I can remember walking
You had to walk.
Linda and Kim to school
Right.
and back, and I can remember taking them to the movies, all of us to the movies.
Yeah.
Linda, Kim, and Paul walked all the way down, 12th Avenue to Hardy Street to go to that cinema.
That's when Paul was just beginning to walk, and he run across the street to the store one time, and some woman come bringing him home.
And she stood there, and because I didn't recognize the woman, I didn't realize it was my child until she said, "Well, is this your baby?" And I looked, yes.
Well, anyway,
And he had got out the front door some way.
he went off
The door was locked.
because
But
he
he
was
got
going
out the
over all
door.
the time buying candy and everything else, and he thought he'd go over there and just give him some candy.
He just come back with a candy bar.
And he was about 2.5, maybe 3 years old. But anyway, when me and Herman was back working together, and I got into JC's, that's when I run into old Sid Odin with Odin Construction Company, and Sid had a BOQ building that going on down at Keishler Field, and this was before Camille. Now we signed the contract to do the masonry work with Sid on that BOQ building. And we run back and forth for 9 months. That was when Camille hit, August the 17th, 1969. And it blew that coast away down there then, but it wasn't near about as bad as Katrina. But anyway, it was bad down there. You couldn't get a place to stay. You have to get in the car and drive to the coast and work all day and then get in the car and drive back. So we drove back and forth 9 months trying to finish that job. We finally got through with it. And that's when I got involved in the JCs with some people that I knew, at Rocky Wright and Nick Riss and
You knew Rocky right through the CB stuff.
Right.
I remember everybody coming over to the house and y'all had an antenna raising.
Yeah.
Put up the
Yeah,
antenna.
put up another.
I remember you leaving the CB radio there, and I was talking to some little girl around the corner. Her daddy was a painter. I don't remember their name, but they lived right around the corner from us. She
Yeah.
had an older sister.
Yeah, I remember him, but I don't remember him.
But anyway,
I
I need to back up a little bit because I want to try to figure out another place where we lived. We lived somewhere where we lived in a little, may have been a duplex apartment, but it was where I got the Tiger Joe tank. I think it's Jackson.
Yeah, it was Jackson.
Because
but it was in,
Doris and Uncle Rudolph
It
lived
was
in this
in,
place that you had to go up a metal.
what's that
Set of
road?
That was
steps.
at Clinton.
Clinton, Mississippi.
That was just outside Jackson, Clinton.
All right, so when
I
was
still
that?
call it Jackson because it was in that.
That's
vicinity,
when
but
we
did it at Clinton.
moved out of the house with Barney and his mother. We didn't stay with them but a few days. Barney got to drinking, and I got in a fight with him because he wanted you to bring him the alcohol bottles to him. And I got mad and said, no, you can't do it.
Well, I was talking to y'all about the place in Clinton because I remember that's where I got the Tiger Joe tank.
Yeah.
We had a fenced-in backyard. I used to slide down those hills that were close by. We'd go to the store and get those waxed crates that the vegetables and bananas came in and slide down them
You
hills
was
on.
about 6 years old.
I remember going to a Christmas party and having to bring an exchange gift, and I walked home with some little boy that was in class with me that had gotten this huge game.
Well, I don't remember
There
being
was
in
this,
school
there
then.
was a limit on what you could spend, but apparently his parents had ignored that, or whoever brought the gift.
Yeah.
And I got a little old model airplane, and I
Yeah.
horse traded with him that model plane, tell him how good that model plane was, how it was a secret model and all this, so I could get that big game. And I know you're gonna remember this though. His big brother apparently was walking behind us and it saw all this take place, and he come knocking on the door and told you that I had Jude his little brother out of that big gift. Oh, I know what it is. I flunked the first grade.
Yeah, you had to go
So
to
I had
first
to
grade
do the first
class.
grade again.
That's right. because,
Right.
that's right, because we moved around so much.
So that's why.
Now, yeah, you was in school, 4
They
different
held you back.
schools, and they held you back
Yeah,
again.
and I was running all over the
So
country.
you was
trying
going
to make
on 7 years old before you was 7 years old before you, 2 months after you started school.
Well, that's how I wound up being so young, and because I knew it was the first or second grade when all this took place. I knew it was the first or second grade.
Well,
So
maybe so.
that's what it was. It may have been the second time in first grade.
Well, yeah.
No, they held you back because we moved around so much.
Yeah, I understand that, but I remember that so clearly of that taking place. That's
That's when we come back in.
because at that time
68.
Aunt Doris was a beautician.
Yeah,
Yeah.
she was a beautician.
She wasn't yet a nurse,
Right.
and I remember that.
And you had some kind of little old camera thing that showed a picture up on the wall because I invited all the little neighborhood kids to come over and eat cake and
Doris had
watch
the
the
beauty
little
shop thing.
movie thing. And
And that was before she started nursing school.
Right.
She put Rudolph to college.
Yeah.
She worked. She run the beauty parlor while Rudolph was studying for the ministry.
Yeah.
And he went to Clark College, one over in I think it was Newton or somewhere like that in Mississippi.
well, and I remember while Doris and them was living there that I went to get my hair fixed maybe once or twice in my whole life. And she let me go and get it done for free at her beauty shop. She didn't do it, but somebody else did it. And while I was there at the beauty shop, Buddy was at home supposedly watching you kids. And Kim and Glenda got every roll of toilet paper that we had, got in a closet with it, and rolled it every roll out all over the floor, and both of them was laying in there asleep when I got home. That's the way I found things. And so Papa apparently didn't even check on them for a long
All right. Well, that's
Right.
what happened. Is we were in Hattiesburg when I started school at camp, and then we went to New
came
Orleans.
back. Yeah.
And I went to school there, and then we went to 2 different schools in New Orleans,
3 different schools.
3 different schools in New Orleans.
You
Okay,
went 4 times your first year.
okay,
different
but
schools.
then I went a second time in the
Second,
first grade,
Yeah, right.
and so that's how I would either in Clinton, I may have started the. Well, if we lived in New Orleans for 2 years, then I had to have completed the second year of the first grade in New Orleans. Maybe
Yeah.
started the second grade. Then we went to Natchez,
Right.
and then we went to.
Well, when we went to Natchez, son, I just went over there for that one job. That's where Mama.
Well,
went
and
home.
then
Well,
we
it
went-
doesn't make any difference.
and then we
went
went
to
to,
Jackson.
uh,
Then we come back to Jackson. So we lived about 5.5 years in
I
Jackson.
understand, but was Clinton the first place we were when we went to Jackson? This house that I'm talking about.
Yeah, because
Yeah,
we moved
yeah.
out of a big old. I wasn't in a big old house with Barney and Ruby, but just for 2 or 3 days. when we got
All right,
apartment.
so see there, that makes sense then. If I was in school in New Orleans, then I would have been in school when we were in that house in
Okay,
Clinton.
maybe so.
We
Uh,
lived in
68.
Jackson until
1968. We came to Hattiesburg.
well, yeah, but before that, Neil, I worked with Archie Falls in Jackson. He was another major contractor, and he had a big job going in Natchez, and it was called it was the National Diamond people that made Natchez, and he needed a superintendent to run the measurement work on it. So he sent me to Natchez to do that. Pat called one day and said Mother was in the hospital over there, was about to die. So I took off and went to Jackson to check on my mother. And I got there in time to see her for a few minutes, and then she passed away. The next morning after I got there early. She passed away the same morning. I got there around 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. from Jackson, and she died about 10:30, 11 o'clock the same morning.
Oh.
So, y'all were living in Jackson after you left Dallas.
And
Then you
that's-
moved from Jackson
Yeah,
to Natchez?
that's it. No, we moved to Natchez, and then after that, we decided, after Mother died, we decided to come back to Hattiesburg. So we came back to Hattiesburg, and we rented that house on 14th Avenue from Mr. Wilson. And you remember it. And of course, that was another situation where we had a terrible winter. And wasn't much going on around here. And Baron Henry had a job going in New Orleans, and he was needing bricklayers over there on some apartments that he was building. So we took off and went to. I took off. Me and Herman Rotsville and 2 or 3 more bricklayers around here that was working with us went to New Orleans to go to work with him. And that's when and I worked there for, well, we didn't get to work very much because it come a snow. And it snowed here in Hattiesburg, and it snowed in New Orleans too. And that was the first time in New Orleans in 25 years they had seen snow in New Orleans. And we thought maybe we were just getting into some cold weather or something like that. They actually had snow, 4 inches of snow in New Orleans. So anyway, while the weather was bad, I told Baron Henry, I said, you know, I ain't used to being without my family. If I'm going to deal with him and work, I'm going home and get my family and come back. And I said, I don't have enough money. And he said, well, can you make it on $60? I said, yeah, I can go over there on $60. So he loaned me $60, and I come back and I got your mother and you and Glenda. Yeah, Glenda was already born because she was born in Dallas.
Oh,
Yes, but
my
now
children
I
were
want to
born.
back up before you go to New Orleans, because while we were on 14th Avenue living with Mr. Wilson,
Yeah.
I started school at Camp Elementary School.
Camp Elementary.
All right, so tell me a little bit about that. I started school, and what was so unique about me going to camp school in the first grade?
Well,
Starting school?
we went up there to register you in school, and the same lady that taught me in the first grade was Miss Johnson. Thelma. No, her name was Thelma Johnson. And so when we got there to put you in school, we met Miss Johnson, and she remembered me from the first grade.
But that's not
And,
all of it. She taught Glenn, she taught you, she taught Glenn, she taught Glenda.
So I started school at camp.
And we
We-
were living on 14th
When we
Avenue.
lived on 14th Avenue, Miss Johnson, Miss Thelma Johnson, who had taught you, recognized you,
Yeah.
taught me, and went on to teach Glenda
Yeah.
when she started the first grade. But now, that was a rough winter. I can remember the pictures on 14th Avenue of snow over a foot deep here
Foot
in
deep in
Hattiesburg.
some places.
Yeah.
And,
And,
icicles that long hanging off the back of the house.
Yeah.
You know, it was cold winter.
So rough winter, and again, work hard to find here in Hattiesburg. So you wound up going to New
Wound up
Orleans
going to New
at
Orleans.
first without your family,
And then I
but then
come
you
back
come
and
back to get us.
And the first week, the first couple of weeks that we were in New Orleans, we rented a little trailer on Chefman Tour Highway. And you was gone to some school over there.
We had to
But you
cross,
used to have to
get
cross
across that school.
Chefman Tour to come from the school. And your
I'd
mother
have to go meet you
would have
every
to go
day.
meet you every day and help you cross the street and take you across the street and everything.
Because it was an
But
8
we
lane,
didn't,
you know,
yeah, we
highway.
didn't stay there for just about 2 weeks. And then we found a house that was vacant on out in Chalmette on Packingham Drive.
Yeah.
And we rented that house out there. And we lived there until,
For about 2 years, and that's where Kim was.
yeah, for about 2 years when Kim was born during that time at St. Claude Hospital.
St.
Yeah,
Claude.
and I went to St. Bernard School there,
Yeah,
and
Friends
so
School.
I went to now we had to get to Natchez somewhere in between there, because supposedly I went to school in Hattiesburg, New Orleans, and Natchez in the first grade.
Well, if you went to
No,
school,
no, you just Hattiesburg and New Orleans. That was it. There were 3 schools in New Orleans and camp school in Hattiesburg.
You wasn't when we was
You didn't go to
living.
school
We
in
went
Natchez.
to Natchez that last time. You were still
Unless it was when you was a bigger
You was
kid.
about probably 5, but before school.
The first grade, it was only New Orleans and Hattiesburg.
Yeah.
But then later on, you might have went to school in Natchez.
So y'all went back to Natchez at some point later in my life.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right.
We're in New Orleans. I'm in the first grade, and then apparently part of the second grade in New Orleans.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah.
And Kim is born during that 2-year period while you're in New
Yeah.
Orleans. Where did we go from New Orleans?
We left New Orleans. That was right after Kim was born, and we come back to Jackson.
All right, I got to go back over this. We went from Dallas back to Hattiesburg, where I started school. Then we left here and went to New Orleans, where I went to school at St. Bernard,
And Kim
and we
was
stayed
born
there 2 years, and Kim was born. So I probably went to the rest of the first and then the second.
You went to French school.
Well, you went
French
to
and St. Bernard. I went to both of those schools
Right.
in New Orleans.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, in Chalmette. When we moved to Chalmette, we didn't. You didn't stay in school with just a few days when we lived on Chestnut Tour Highway over there. So you wasn't there for just a couple of weeks, and then we bought got that house out there.
Okay, so that's where we
Yeah,
got
right.
the 3 schools in the first grade.
Right.
It was
Right.
Camp, French, and St. Bernard.
Right.
Okay, all right.
And you have to remember that I was trying to stay busy, trying to make a living. That's when 1968 come in.
Okay, well, let's back up. I'm going to back up. Queen Marie Lane, Danny Patty, Vito Patty,
Yeah.
Dixie Patty.
Dixie
We
family.
live next door to them, Miss Westbrook on the other side.
Right.
We got Queenie there.
Yeah.
Yeah. The dog.
And then we had to give up the
German
dog
Shepherd.
When we moved over to that other apartment. I remember that. But I went to, that was Raines Elementary there, right?
I think so.
So that was like 3rd grade. That was where I went to the 3rd grade, was Raines.
Yeah.
And then we moved from there to that house you're talking about that was near Papa Barney.
Yeah.
Because he was
He
around the
lived on
corner on
Bailey
Bailey Avenue,
Right.
where he built the wreaths, made the wreaths, and
Right,
sold.
right.
It was next door to a Sinclair service station.
Yeah.
Because I remember that. I always went next door to buy soda for us.
Yeah.
And I'd go over there by myself, spend the night sometimes, and all that. And I was going to Gallagher School
Right.
at
Here.
that time.
At that time.
So I think I went to the 4th grade, or it was probably part of the 3rd, part of the 4th, because when we came back from Jackson to Hattiesburg, I started back at camp in the 4th grade.
Right.
But I only had a
Well,
small,
Glenda was in
short
school
piece
then
of it.
because you and Glenda had to walk to school together.
I know, but I only had a
lived
short
in that
piece
house
of
on
the
Adeline Street.
4th grade to complete, and then I went to the 5th and 6th there for the whole time.
Right.
All right, but okay, so
That was after we come back in '68.
I know that.
What brought us back in '68? After me and Big Road Briggs got to working together and doing masonry work around wherever we could find it in Jackson. Then we come back home for a weekend. No, they called me. Hughes Incorporated out of Laurel called me, and they were building this medical plaza center over here in front of Forest Young, and they needed somebody to run that job. So I come back and I run that medical plaza building, the masonry on it, until it was complete.
with the big water fountain and all
Right.
that.
And we moved in.
And after that, old Herman Rossville kept running him time too. And then Herman, he was subbing too, and that's when he got all these. And y'all were still in Jackson at those partners were dogs. And Herman had taken a bunch of work building Holiday Inns all over the country. And he talked me into to going back over there and building one at Longview, Texas. And we went to Longview and we built a Holiday Inn there. And that was when we were still living over there with ours. And then we went to Nacogdoches, Louisiana, and built one, a Holiday Inn there. And that's when we decided to move back. After we finished those two jobs, Herman was talking about going back home because his family was here. I knew everybody here. So we come back in '68.
Yeah, all right.
That's when
No, wait a minute. I want to back
That's
up.
when we come
Before
back
we
to
come
14th
back,
Avenue.
there was part of that time in Jackson where you must have worked some of the time local, because that was the first summer that I remember working with you. Because Ricky was living with us and Alan was living with us. With the money that I had, you maybe put up half of everything I earned, and I bought my first school clothes. So I had to have worked part of the summer, at least a few weeks with you.
That was when me and
we
Leroy
worked
were working
local.
together. That's when me and Leroy was working
You worked
together.
in Jackson quite a bit, buddy.
Yeah, we stayed in Jackson some
All right.
for 5
6
years.
years.
in
I
Jackson.
understand, and so we need to go back to Palo Alto Drive because we lost it somewhere in.
Yeah.
You know, your daddy's
Yeah, we
losing
when
it.
we first moved back, got that house on Palo Alto Drive, and then that's when we bought the house on Queen Marie Lane.
So we started out in Jackson on Palo Alto Drive,
Right.
and we lived at that house quite a few,
Pretty good
We
one.
Wow.
lived at that house about a year.
because I remember I learned to ride a bicycle there.
Yeah.
If you remember that, at first I couldn't ride it, and I
You like to burn
took the
the
training
tail
wheels
down.
off of it,
Yeah.
and I wouldn't ride it because it kept wrecking, and then I put it up and didn't touch it for like 2 or 3 months. And
I
then
don't remember
when I
that,
picked
but-
it back up, I was riding it crazy, and I remember riding with those hands and all that stuff because
We lived right behind the airport then.
Yeah, you
Right.
set the
And
field
you would go
on
over at
fire
the
and
airport. They have
then
Air National Guard used to tell you.
next door neighbor had to put it out, and I was afraid the airport was gonna sue us or something, you know.